Hello, everybody, and welcome to our webinar today. Uh, we're just going to give folks about, I don't know, 30, 45 more seconds to file in, and then we will formally get started. But you are in the right place. This is a case study about how Adobe transformed content fragmentation into authoritative context to scale for AI product support. That's what we're going to talk about today. So just a few more seconds and we'll get started. You can go ahead and flip back to there you go. Looks like a few more people are filing in. That's great. Excellent. Okay, let's go ahead and get started. Welcome, everybody. My name's Bram Wessel, and I am from Factor, and I'm here to be the host and the MC today. You've come to the right place. This is a webinar with Factor and Top Quadrant, and we're going to talk about how our mutual customer, Adobe, transformed their fragmented content environment into a really authoritative context layer or platform, if you will, to scale AI for product support. With us today are Rachel Madison from Adobe, Connor Cantrell from Factor, Jesse Lambert from Top Quadrant, and also Ingrid Ramos from Top Quadrant. So as we go, please feel free to use the chat to post any questions that you might have. We'll be monitoring that chat, and hopefully we can answer questions in real time. If you have questions you want to save for the Q&A at the end of the program, just type the name of the person that you want to direct that question to, one of the panelists. So we're going to have 3 sections today, and then we're going to save probably about 15, 20 minutes at the end for some Q&A. And to start us off, I'm going to turn us over to Ingrid Ramos from Top Quadrant, who's going to talk a little bit about context and their tool. Take it away, Ingrid.
Thank you, Bram. Welcome, everyone. We really appreciate your time today. My missive here is really to very briefly give some background context on context. So that's kind of a meta missive here today. And then following my overview, we'll kick it over to Connor, and then over to Jesse, and then to Q&A. And they have the good stuff, so I'm going to get right to it. You may have heard the word context being thrown around a lot recently. I think specifically, as relates to AI, how our data is being perceived by AI, its metadata, et cetera. And so just wanted to do a brief overview of sort of from what we see from our point of view here at Top Quadrant, how we worked together with Factor, and how we worked together with our mutual customer, Adobe. First, just a quick bit about Top Quadrant. We are a context management platform. We're well known for our ontology and taxonomy solutions, but have solutions across data governance, metadata management, intelligent decision making, and agent enablement. We have been recognized by Gartner in the Metadata Management Magic Quadrant, as well as the Master Data Management Magic Quadrant. And we serve, typically enterprise organizations such as the ones you see here. I'm our head of marketing here at Top Quadrant, and I think I've been doing this sort of knowledge graph stuff for a while now, and today's word might be context, but I remember, Bram and several of the folks on this call might remember that before that it was data fabric or data mesh and knowledge graphs as relates to ontologies, taxonomies, et cetera. So, whatever we're calling it, and I do appreciate the word context and how we're referring to it now, because I think it's a little more accessible than perhaps the way it was being framed previously in our data and AI world. But why are we calling it this? What is it? Why is it suddenly so important? And it really is it just the same thing we've all been doing in the semantic world with a different name. So in true semantic fashion, I will say here that the actual word instance context has been showing up a lot more recently. Here's an N graph from Google that shows that the usage of the word from its inception in books has increased. My favorite part of this slide, though, is that Google says that Ngrams are probably unreliable. So I love that AI helped me find this, but I also immediately ran into the incorrect context when trying to research a little bit more on, what is context. For those who like to document the origin and taxonomy of things, it did come in the early 15th century from the Latin to weave together, from com, which was changed to con, with or together, and textere, to weave or to make. Typically, it was being used in text or as relates to text. And as we move into modern times, particularly in the mid-20th century, it became a more technical term, but technical within linguistics and information theory and computing to talk about, um, how the context of as we see the world around us. And then today, or as relates to AI, right? It's being now used to talk about the surrounding information, memory, metadata that we provide AI systems to assure that outputs are accurate, relevant, and grounded. So for those that like to feel grounded in what we're talking about, there it is. The business problem that we're seeing across the board here is that in AI pilots, right, whether they're individuals or teams or the enterprise using AI, in production or in individual use cases, it's fine. But once we level it up to the enterprise, we run into some walls, particularly when you're in a highly governed industry or where it's important for your brand to be correct, or it's a life-saving project that you're on, right? A mission critical project, and you can't be wrong. Our enterprises really are in working in spaces where they can't afford or do not want to be wrong. And so in production, these AI pilots or these individual use cases do not pass the muster. The answers can't be traced. You're constantly spending tokens on your AI. You're rebuilding the vocabulary every time. In other words, I might be using a list of customers and then I tweak it, right? But then somebody else is using it, somebody else is using it. And now you're building technical debt, but you're also building semantic debt. These are things that could be brought up to the level of the enterprise and made authoritative as authoritative context through the work that many semantic folks do in taxonomies, ontologies, et cetera, and delivered to agents so that they don't disagree with one another. There's not various copies of the truth lying around. So that's what's bubbling the problem up, really, in short, right? The enterprise can't feel confident about the usage of AI and the outputs that AI are giving against how they're running the business. We've tried to, throw more data at it. We've tried to put a vector database over it. We've tried to increase the memory window or the context window. We've tried prompt engineering. Well, if I just keep telling ChatGPT or Claude what to do over and over again, it will learn this, right? But what the agent, really needs, especially in order for us not to be building this over and over again, is to understand what words in our business mean, how they relate to one another, when they can use them, when they can't use them, and they need to be able to do that all the time, at runtime, every time they're outputting something. And finally, of course, they need to be able to cite back who made this decision, how was it made, because many of our industries and customers need this for compliance, whether it's internal or external. So plainly speaking, a lot of this work, this context building work, has been done through taxonomy, ontology, or knowledge graph work. And so it's no surprise that these are the backbones to building context. And I think we're at an inflection point in time where many folks who sort of tried to do this, solve it with the AI itself, are realizing, well, it's the AI that's causing the problem, and perhaps it is counterintuitive that I'm trying to solve the problem with the very thing that is creating the problem. So we go back to our traditional tried and true methods that I know our industry has continued to meet the moment and modernize and progress on what we're doing here. But this work is really important. It's important to AI there's a taxonomist or ontologist on your team right now that can likely solve this problem. So hopefully, one of the messages you take today is to ask them about it and see if they can contribute here. Because as you'll hear in this story, that really becomes the hero of how we got to where we got to. And this is not just something that we here at Top Quadrant are seeing or talking about. The Gartner has just this last week, in fact, come out with one of their first market overviews on context. They're calling this AI context platforms. But again, yes, that's semantics. But really, what they're saying here is that context is needed to deliver data and engineering teams what they need, semantically organized knowledge to the AI agents and other applications and services so that they're grounded in the truths of our organizations. I have truths in how I work. My team has truths in how they work. My business has truths. And so how can all these truths be right at the same time? This semantic backbone or context, right? A central control center that manages the universal truth for an organization. And so that's what Gartner is saying here. By 2027, 80% of organizations that prioritize semantics and AI-ready data will increase agentic AI accuracy by 80% and reduce costs by up to 60%. So they're coming out with a lot of good research notes in this area. We can share links to that, hopefully in some follow-ups, so that if you're interested, you could read more. And so I'm not going to go into the architecture here, but again, context layer, context management, whatever we're calling this, really it's that layer that sits in between where your data lives and where your applications are accessing that data, translating it according to your grounded and authoritative truths. Jesse on our side is going to go into more what we mean by authoritative context, and that's really like the definitions, the references, the metadata, and how we organize this in order to provide authoritative context to the outputs, whether they're human or AI. So I won't dig too deep into it, just wanted to get you a visual of how that context layer is developing across the industry. And I'm going to end it here by citing a study that Adobe put out in their 2026 AI and digital trends research. 75% of organizations cite data integration and quality as the top obstacle to AI. So I think Adobe, really went out and tried to understand what some of the issues were on their customers' behalf, but really on their own behalf too. And I think this story that Connor's going to start here is going to show you how Adobe began to solve some of these challenges within their own walls. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Connor.
Thanks, Ingrid. Let me get sharing here. Perfect. So I wanted to start by introducing the part of Adobe which Rachel Madison brought the Factor team in to help with. So the name for the comprehensive suite of services for taxonomy design, implementation, governance, and insights that Rachel has managed is called Oxford Taxonomy as a Service, or Oxford TAS. You may hear me refer to it as Oxford or as TAS throughout the presentation. That's what it means. So what does Oxford do? Oxford supports learn content on Creative Cloud products. So think like your Photoshop and your Firefly and not like your AEM or your Workfront. So some of our core services include our API, which allows consuming partners to ingest a governed list of tags for filtering and authoring templates. It also very helpfully disincentivizes unauthorized ad hoc taxonomy modifications within authoring systems. So authors aren't supposed to and can't randomly add just like a new term to their authoring system. And the API also supplies the auto tagger with a consistent tagging framework. So our auto tagger, very nicely, is actually the only bulk content tagging system at Adobe governed by a dedicated taxonomy team. Oxford also manages a related curation tool so that product experts and authors can review those machine-generated tags, and that allows them to approve relevant ones and remove incorrect ones. One of our final main core service is the taxonomy MCP, which provides tools and resources so that internal agents can traverse the taxonomy effectively. And then finally, we have a resource portal where our partner teams can self-serve for access to these services and documentation and all that great stuff. So here's a closer look at what the team structure looks like for maintaining these services. Rachel is our valiant PM of the Oxford team, which consists of 3 engineers as well as 2 taxologists. That's an emerging term we've latched onto because it describes the full range of semantic structures we work on. So Rachel gets to focus on doing her PM job while the taxologists, myself and my colleague Gigi Farner, process the taxonomy requests, which can be anything from, hey, add this new feature we're rolling out, to we need to support 25 new products in the next 6 weeks. I'll also note that Gigi is in chat today, so please do chime in Gigi in chat on any questions we may get, or if you can add any elaboration to what I'm saying. So Gigi and I are both from Factor. Factor has been working with Rachel's Oxford team for the past few years. And then finally, the engineers are the ones who build services like our auto tagger and the MCP server and make sure the data gets where it needs to go. So how did our humble taxonomy team start getting involved in AI initiatives? Last year, the director of Rachel's org was in a meeting about Adobe's first chatbot that had been released to the public. And it was coming back with wrong answers and sending customers to the wrong products. Now, Rachel has been fighting the good fight for taxonomy for like the past 6 or 7 years. And that really worked in Oxford's favor in this meeting because this org director told the AI team, well, if you're using task data, this answer should be wrong. So it turns out Rachel had actually been in touch with the same AI team several times, and they said they didn't need Oxford data. So at the prodding of this director, the task team was able to show an exact example of how our data could solve the accuracy problem for that AI experience. And leadership was thrilled. Rachel was in other strategic meetings that week, and we even got to retain an engineering resource we thought we might lose. This was also a really significant turning point for the team to get our budget approved for top quadrant. More on that in a moment. But ever since this interaction, we've been tagged into several projects to help support AI. So what is it about our data that's so useful to AI? Our basic taxonomic structure consists of 4 levels downstream from any given topic. Creative fields, then topics, then tasks, and then tools features. They're represented here as a vertical hierarchy, but they are created and stored, or have been before top quadrant, as related tables in Airtable, which all credit to Rachel. The richness of the schema design and governance process she set up in Airtable is truly remarkable. And from a design standpoint, the lines here are better described as direct relationships rather than strictly hierarchical ones. That being said, in kind of the visualization on screen, we could say the relationships often are polyhierarchical. So like, for example, we have a topic called removing backgrounds, and that applies to the creative fields, painting and illustration, as well as graphic design. And certain levels of the tree here are more fixed than others. For example, our creative field level only has like 10 terms, and our standard of practice is not to add any terms to that level. While tool feature, for example, that level has hundreds of terms and gets updated anytime we find out about a new menu, panel, or tool rolling out in our products. Content authors tend to be the ones requesting updates to the topic and task level, like when they can't find the gradients topic for Photoshop, but they know that exists as a topic because they saw it when authoring something about Illustrator. Sometimes we get a request for a new term that already conceptually exists in our taxonomy, and we end up directing the requester to use an existing term or adding a new synonym that better captures the nuance of their context. So if someone requests gradient editing as a topic, we would probably come back and say, hey, we have this existing topic term gradients, like, can you use that? Or like maybe we need to add this specific verbiage as a synonym or alt label. So hopefully you're getting the idea that just because someone requests a term doesn't mean it automatically gets added to the skill tree. We rely on our consuming partners to provide their subject matter expertise on the development and implementation of the concepts represented in our taxonomy. But the work of normalizing a given concept so it can be used by Learn and maybe help over here and some of our other partners elsewhere. Um, that's what taxologists are trained to do. So the taxologists require extra information about new or updated terms beyond just definition and relevant product. To go back to that gradients example, if the requester came back and said, actually gradient editing is really different from gradients, we would require additional information to justify that disambiguation, like, screenshots of the tasks and tools relevant to that topic that separate it from just gradients. This allows us to appropriately normalize that new term with any existing similar concepts and place it in the best location in the hierarchy. So the other element that makes our data so special is our notion of tasks, which officially describes the actions users take as they follow the content's instructions. This is something the Oxford team has supported for years, which means that in the context of, LLM and AI experiences, like I'll talk a little bit more about today, our content that we support is already tagged with the fundamental job a user is trying to accomplish. That's why this is actually often referred to as an intent taxonomy, even though the word intent doesn't show up anywhere, because it's so optimized to capture user intent about the content to which the tags are applied. It's also related to other important descriptive signals, like, a specific tool feature or a specific product, which makes this taxonomy an ideal structure for a machine to reason over, almost. More on that later. So here's an example of how task data has been used by AI projects since we got that executive attention on our data. Back in January, Rachel's boss brought an urgent request to Oxford. The team working on the customer-facing LLM experience needed the top 10 prompts from the LLM mapped to relevant Learn content. This was especially urgent because it was a chance to demonstrate the value of our emerging content MCP and taxonomy MCP to the team working on AI experiences. And the interesting thing is, when we got this request, instead of the AI and content teams going off and independently finding, their own relevant tutorials and articles and so on, they pretty much immediately turned to the taxonomists and asked for assistance. Why? So just as taxonomy or any structured semantic data like an ontology or knowledge graph has been a critical component of the semantic layer between back-end technical architecture and traditional front-end experience. Now it's also fundamentally the connective tissue between AI experiences and the content they're trying to reference and expose. So what the content team wanted from tasks was to map that list of prompts to an intent or one of our tasks. And at this point, you might be thinking, why, Connor? Surely you don't need a taxologist for this mapping. Just feed it to an AI and let it do its job. To which I say, believe me, I have tried. So some context, that word again. By this point, Oxford was not unfamiliar with using AI in taxonomy development and maintenance. In 2025, we actually leaned heavily on Copilot, which was the licensed Adobe Enterprise AI at the time, to help us double the size of our taxonomy with 25 new products and all the associated updates required throughout the topics, tasks, and tool features levels of the skill tree. And after some significant trial and error by me and Gigi, we landed on the right prompts to get Copilot to identify relevant existing terms, generate required new terms, and map relationships between the different skill tree levels. And it was actually quite successful. The LLM did ultimately help us get like 90% faster with taxonomy development at that scale. But Adobe, in that case, explicitly decided to tolerate a high risk for any AI results that were inconsistent, unintended, and maybe even straight up inaccurate, because the specific new products we were supporting were a mix of kind of legacy and low visibility apps. So they were willing to let a couple inaccurate terms slip through. However, I knew that the prompt mapping exercise from that LLM team would not have that same risk tolerance and require a much closer eye toward mitigation. So I had all this in my head when I uploaded the skill tree spreadsheets and the list of prompts to Copilot. I gave it the context of my role and my goal. I feel pretty confident that I gave, enough or the right context because it repeated my goals and ideal process back to me. Compare the prompt list to the task tags and retrieve the most relevant task tags for each prompt. And what resulted for me was kind of like a truly historic failure of process. Copilot was not able to associate any of the dozen tasks we have with PDF in the label to the prompt called how to create/edit PDFs. And that includes the tasks we have called create PDF and edit PDF. And this kind of continues to haunt me to this day because I see this as the exact, so-called dishes and laundry action these AI experiences are supposed to take off my plate. But it couldn't detect that the string create PDF was related to the string how to create/edit PDF. And I mean, I'm really lucky that I only had to produce mappings for 10 prompts. This would have been a lot harder at a larger scale, like in the previous project. So the rest of that Copilot map list was pretty similar in terms of quality of results, which meant I needed to expend extra bandwidth to review those results and comb through the list of over 1,700 tasks to ensure the most relevant terms were included. Now, I'm one of the Oxford taxologists, so I'm probably more familiar with the list than almost anyone else at the org. But I mean, frankly, I don't have the cognitive power to store and retrieve all those terms and their associated attributes on demand. So I did have to really scan that list repeatedly. All told, I sent, over the verified prompt mapping the next day, and the content team was able to search for the content tagged with the relevant tasks and retrieve the appropriate content to complete the overall mapping exercise. So there is kind of an epilogue here, because since this project several months ago, Adobe now provides an enterprise instance of Claude. So for my own knowledge and to prepare for the next time we get this kind of request, I did try running the same prompts through Sonnet 4.6 and got much better results. And yes, it did discern that create PDF and edit PDF should be associated with that prompt about it. And that's actually a really exciting signal for our MCP work. So I'm not going to go super deep into the specifics of our MCP design, but the canonical idea behind the notion is that individual data owners create and manage their own MCPs. Although historically our taxonomy has been used primarily to support content tagging, content and taxonomy are managed as separate data sources in the business. So in broad strokes, the tools in the content MCP accomplish a few key tasks. They search for content by keywords, filter content by the metadata, and retrieve specific content and associated metadata as needed. In contrast, the taxonomy MCP is focused primarily on traversing our hierarchies. Both house important tasks to making content interpretable to an agent, so why are they separate? Well, if the content and taxonomy MCPs were rolled into one, then content would also have to, own taxonomy updates, and it would be much harder to provide only taxonomy data to maybe some of those agents who don't need the content part of the data. Our MCP environment then reflects the actual organization of the business. Content is here and taxonomy is here, and they work together really closely, but they're ultimately separate teams with separate expertise. So the result of maintaining the MCP ecosystem this way and providing data through the taxonomy MCP is a 78% improvement in response quality, meaning a taxonomy-driven response was preferred 78% more often than the alternative across the rounds of testing performed by our engineering team. And that's really exciting. But do you remember when I said the Oxford taxonomy data was almost the ideal data structure for reasoning? Well, as incredible as the work we were able to do in Airtable was, and as much as the MCPs enhance agentic reasoning, we really have been feeling a number of kind of knowledge graph shaped problems over the past couple years. So first, I think what's probably most exciting to our engineering partners is the notion of bringing in some deterministic inference expansion and constraint, which can make our AI experiences even more accurate than they already are by supplying them a machine readable model of what data is related and what isn't. I think actually that's why we had so much friction with those Copilot prompt mapping processes because, reading the individual terms as strings and the relationships between the different levels of the hierarchy not being as explicit, I think caused us a lot of issues. And then, we also have our partners in SEO or GEO or AEO or, whatever it may be called this week. They're really interested in how graphs can improve authority and credibility because every node and edge in the graph has, a URI, Uniform Resource Identifier. So with the right modeling exposed to the Google web crawler, our content can be more interpretable and credible to the big AI experiences that use the web crawler to pull data. We're also really interested at Oxford in the notion of connecting to heterogeneous data sources. So continuing to improve credibility by linking to external sources like Wikidata or DBpedia, or even to internal sources that, may allow us to, for example, normalize marketing data against sales data. And then finally, I think we're also hearing a lot of interest in the notion of building a graph structure for extensibility and interoperability. One of the exciting elements of having our data be more visible means that more people want to use it and contribute. So we are kind of facing the process of adding new domains. And with a graph, that can be more about inserting new values than blowing up and redesigning the whole schema. So I think this journey has felt like a really classic, information architecture taxonomy problem to be into GG because we pretty quickly grasped the problem area and, what Oxford should ideally do. But the real hard work was figuring out what could actually be done and negotiating with Rachel's stakeholders to help get them on board with her vision. So I think there are many kinds of resources that help determine what can actually be done. But some of the most important to this story include our tools, our staffing, and our credibility. So that's why Top Quadrant initially appeared on our radar. It was actually already in use at Adobe in a similar but distinct taxonomy area. And a significant portion of 2025 for our Oxford taxonomy team was spent partnering with TQ to work through that POC and go through that budget request process. And actually, this time last year, we were still kind of unsure whether or not we would actually get that approval. But then that chatbot release I mentioned at the top of my slides happened. So that budget approval was really exciting news for us because even if you use a tool with a really friendly UI, a knowledge graph is not an uncomplicated structure. It requires specific standards and languages for serializing, expressing, querying, manipulating all the nodes and edges. We knew we were looking at a non-trivial amount of remodeling to transform that tabular data into triples that at scale create that web mesh structure that is so useful to machines. And we were also thinking about, potentially remapping to the schema.org data types and properties exposed through JSON LD by our tech SEO team, as well as integrating with our MCP servers on top of all that. And as unusually well-staffed as Oxford has been for a taxonomy team, our experience of the staffing changed when we started thinking about what kind of graph capabilities we wanted to enable. And when I say we're well-staffed, I think we're really well-staffed for recreating the Airtable functionality in a graph. So, the first step or two in a long journey towards the richness of all these graph capabilities. When at Oxford started thinking about how advantageous it would be to enable some of the more sophisticated capabilities like, live syncs between tags and content, or the ability to model workflows to give agents decision-making precedence, the resourcing definitely started to feel a little more limited. And, the only way to unlock budget for that resourcing is building credibility. So I think the credibility element is often the most difficult component of any project like this because it's so rooted in the dynamics of social and political capital at any given enterprise. That was definitely true for us. I will say Gigi and I were also thinking about two different axes of credibility. We were thinking about our credibility as, a consulting team supporting Rachel, but also as representatives of the Oxford taxonomy team within Adobe. So earlier this year, we were in a meeting with Rachel when she let us know that she had just randomly got it added to an informal Slack group of taxonomist type folks at Adobe. And they were putting together this group because they wanted to work toward a unified taxonomy standard, which, really exciting, right? And it was because what a great opportunity for Rachel to promote her great work. Um, it also meant Oxford was facing down an entirely new group of stakeholders with whom to build credibility. And it became clear pretty quickly that this new group of stakeholders was working with a range of understandings of, foundational terms like taxonomy. It culminated in kind of a content writer type person telling us, you're taxonomists, but we need an ontology. So I don't know if you're the right people to be in this conversation, which is a big reason we've started calling ourselves taxologists to help folks understand we work on all kinds of semantic structures, not just hierarchical controlled vocabularies. And this made it clear to us that there was a need and an opportunity for someone to start putting a stake in the ground about what these words mean. So a couple months ago, Gigi and I hosted a lunch and learn for this group, and the invites were forwarded to a few other folks across Adobe. We had our taxonomy type attendees, but we also had folks from data governance and AI engineers. Well, we were able to put some boundaries around what these terms mean, like taxonomy and ontology and vocabulary and graph. And we also put some boundaries around what they can do. And we had a surprisingly good reaction. I'm going to be a little nerdy and try to reach into the recesses of my brain to think, remember the sociology class I took 15 years ago. Because I think sometimes influence and power looks a little bit like reasoning in a knowledge graph. I directly gave that presentation to a group of 24 people, but in the month since, Outlook has notified me that the recording has been forwarded by members of the original group to other people in different parts of the organization. I didn't directly give those people that information, but it's still building Oxford's credibility. So looking forward, Oxford is really excited about our progress with our TQ migration. I think Jesse is going to give us a closer look at kind of what our modeling decisions actually look like in the tools UI. But I will say that, he and the rest of the TQ team have been incredibly supportive during the migration process. We're just about at the end of the big lift for the taxologists, for me and Gigi, on the design process. And so now we're working with our engineers to get our service integration away from Airtable and onto Top Quadrant as our single source of truth. So now I'm going to pass the mic off to Jesse to show off the tool itself.
Just 1 second before we do that, I just want to encourage everybody to post questions in the Q&A feature. You'll see it down at the bottom of the Zoom tool list below the presenter window, little question mark icon. So please, if you have any questions, go ahead and include those in that Q&A. And now, Jesse, I'll hand it over to you.
Thanks, Bram. Thanks, Connor. What a great presentation, Connor. I'm going to try to do my best to mirror and reflect a lot of what you said. Bram, can you confirm that you're seeing my slides?
I am. You're not in slideshow mode yet, but I do see them. There you go.
Thank you. Thank you. All right. And then looking at the time, I'm going to go pretty fast to get us so that we can open up and do Q&A. I'm going to take it from here, picking up and reflecting and trying to mirror a lot of what Connor said, but man, she covered so much, but just going to reflect a lot in a tooling point of view. So we knew, based on hearing the requirements from Connor and team, that they would need to do the remodeling, moving from Airtables and whatnot, governance and delivery. That's basically what we came in to do. Another way of saying remodeling, governance, and delivery is confidence, ownership, and trust. Not exactly one-to-one, but ultimately, as you build up that pipeline, what we're shooting for is someone on the other side to be able to trust what they were getting fed, whether that was some sort of direct pipeline or an AI-based pipeline. Showing the same architecture that was reflected earlier by Ingrid. Top quadrant, what we call TQ data foundation, sits as an authoritative context layer. And we connect across the enterprise, but ultimately we're that layer that sits between the data and everything that uses it so that we can be that authoritative context. And that's where things like all the cool stuff and the geeky cool stuff that Connor said, URIs and canonical IDs and the graph connections, standards-based, APIs to get to everything. That's ultimately what the top quadrant platform came in. So we had the expert users, we had the visionary person that had the big picture. We came in to basically just be the canvas and tool that they could use that had the features that they needed. So first challenge, or kind of like our target, replace Airtable as fast as possible. Okay, and that begins with the remodeling. So I'll jump into a quick demonstration here. Just going to move over one tab. I'm going to just stay in browser mode here. I'm working on in a local version of Top Quadrant, but I do have an early snapshot of some of the Oxford information, but this isn't by any means the most recent or the best way to look at it. Talk to Connor and Gigi about that. I'm the tool expert. I'm not necessarily the data expert, but I was just geeking out as Connor was talking. So let's take a look at it. It's like, okay, Oxford core ontology. We must be building on SCOS because SCOS is going to be our taxonomy ontology, and that's exactly where we start. So at the top of our ontology tree, we've got SCOS concept, and we get all of the cool, really good SCOS concept properties. But by no means do we stop there, because whenever everything's a concept, well, everything's a concept. So you need brands to be brands, you need features to be features, products to be products, and then the interrelationships go amongst them. So instead of some large, complex upper ontology, they can do that anytime they want to map to schema.org, to go with SEO or anything like that, like Connor said. So the ability to take this pragmatic or practical ontology and align it, that's all built into the tool as well. And we can do that. And as I click through this, for example, if I click on product, over here, you can see the URIs on product. And if I click on a relationship that exists between product and a topic, that has a URI for the shackle shape, the property path, everything is there. So the prefixes, the URIs, everything about the naming convention, the model, the constraints, the permissible values, everything like that is now in their fingertips. Instead of trying to interpret what to do to a column or what to do to a row when comparing it to another, what they're able to do is say everything basically has its own ownership, everything can have its own ID, and that supports the human user in the design and modeling, but then it directly reflects in the data and then the consumption of that data, the delivery of that data as well. So whenever somebody like me who knows the tool really well says, if I were to pull up a whiteboard here and I said, well, obviously product's going to be at the center of the universe, and I'm having a conversation with Gigi, and she's like, well, yeah, to some people, but the same people that think, other people would say maybe topic's the most important. And it's like, well, obviously they have an association to each other, but maybe from a more technical point of view, somebody says, well, no, it would be the features that would be the most important. And of course, they have interrelationships to each other. But Gigi's like, Jesse, look at it from a task point of view. That's where a lot of things are brought together. We're basically getting closer to modeling the intention, as Connor went over, or the desire that AI may be able to try to comprehend someday. So I'm like, okay, well, where does task come into play? And then I was like, oh, okay, now I get it. Task is highly interconnected. This is a woven graph. The relationships are identifiable, the constraints are controllable, and then all of this is based on standards. No black box, nothing proprietary. You can do what you need to do with this. Top Quadrant is just helping you do the doing. Okay, so this was pretty cool for me to realize. And then to look at the data, I can go back up to my collections where I should have introduced it better a little bit. If I click on the collections in the UI, I went straight to ontologies, or maybe I actually went right from the homepage straight to the ontology. But what Top Quadrant is at the top level is kind of like a catalog or a collection of collections, a graph of graphs, and you get to control access and ownership, workflows, and approvals to all of these different kinds of things. So what we looked at just now was the Oxford core ontology. I'll jump into taxonomies where I have some of their different modular taxonomies, but with task as my focus, I'm just going to jump over there because as soon as I go in there, you get this high level view of task isn't just a hierarchical structure of tasks. Tasks is connected to products. Product is connected to topic. Topics are connected to other things. And you have a semantic representation of buttons, menus, features, and then the task trying to be accomplished that requires those features for said product in said brand. And therefore, you can go from brand all the way down to a button, or you could go from button all the way up through and what task was needing, what task required you to use that button. So very nice connection here. And some of these things are simple, right? So creative fields is kind of like a small, nice controlled vocabulary. And even here, if I were to click on something like photography, multilingual, highly interconnected, and associated. So as I scroll down, very large scroll bar, lots of connections to photography, for example. Okay, so a lot of capability here. And if I move over to search, because I'll mention in one of my slides, Premiere Rush. So Factor does this really cool, or maybe even Rachel directly does a really cool explanation of like, well, Premiere Rush, which is highly used, but being sunset, it's still relevant, still supported, but not to be promoted, right? It kind of gets complicated. And then imagine AI trying to make sense of that. Well, they are able to tell that story and decorate it so well in their model that they can help the AI know exactly what to do and what not to do with things. So it's a really cool story. So what I've done before is I come here and I do a search on Premiere, but then I backed off and I just did a search on Rush. And this is just me being a tech geek. So Rush, I'm not promoting semantic search here. I'm literally doing a raw free text search, and Premiere Rush is causing some of these results, but the word brush is also causing a lot of these results. And what's in a lot of the different Adobe toolings? Brushes, brush capabilities, all kinds of really cool stuff. So if I take all of these results and dare to just throw them onto a visualization palette, they'll calculate. And if I pick the right knowledge graph and zoom into it, I can find Premiere Rush at the center of the universe of this connected knowledge graph and its richness. But then I can also find, probably just a few clicks away, a very highly interconnected knowledge graph of brushes, probably related to features and tools and stuff like that. So for me, it was just a take it in a moment. You've got one knowledge graph, one place to govern it. It's all accessible, but the people that are experts on brushes can contribute to brushes, and the people that are experts on other things can contribute to other things. And what TQ allows us to do is control the access, the governance, and everything thereof. So very highly interconnected knowledge graphs. And I'm sure there's things in this bottom graph that are just one or two clicks away from things that are in the upper graph. But I thought that was just a really cool realization. And this isn't even a complete, this is an old version. So there's some things here that are being identified as orphaned in this graph. And that's cool, because what we can do is we can actually work through and click on these things and make sure that things are there. And we can write validation and queries against all of this as well. So just thought that that was really cool to share. And then coming back to the presentation, if we move forward, the benefit or the value of being able to do everything that I just said was really simply, we're not working in tables and, we're not working in rows anymore. So we get to author and maintain polyhierarchy, hierarchical and horizontal relationships, right? Associative relationships, validation, versioning, all of the constraints, publishing, automation, a lot of things. But ultimately, on the right-hand side is really what matters. The AI accuracy is what we've built up to. Factor knew how to deliver for Rachel. Top Quadrant came in and gave a platform to basically do the publishing with, so that they weren't stuck with a simple structure. Now, taking all of that and saying, well, how do we own it? How do we publish? How do we do what we need to do with it? The publishing a lot of times translates to something like a workflow, and making sure that the right people are doing the right thing at the right time. And Connor actually had a graphic on, like a workflow on with swim lanes on her screen. I'll show an example of one real quick inside of Top Quadrant, and leaving here, jumping back over. This is a production copy. Okay, so pretend this is in the production environment. This is the production copy of the taxonomy. I shouldn't be using my admin privileges to edit and manipulate this, right? I'm going to be logged in with single sign-on. I'm going to have access. This is going to be in protected mode. And if I were to want to do something like edit this thing, I can right-click, start a workflow. You can have many different kinds of workflows. TQ gives you the whole UX to basically manage workflows, assign them to the right kinds of collections. And then the workflows themselves are basically customizable. So this one, for example, if I focus just on the diagram, where I'm at is I'm in a working copy of the taxonomy. So I'm free to make the changes that I need to make. I won't actually impact production until, let me zoom in a little bit here. Ultimately, in the end, I'm wanting to make my changes, consciously decide if it was a major, minor, or patch, submit it for approval, where I can get approval or get rejected and have to make further changes. So a data steward could submit it to the taxologist for review. A product owner might propose a candidate term and then submit it for review. Okay, so this is all just custom. It doesn't have to follow this exact sequence. We can make any kind of sequencing and review and approval process needed. But I thought this was a good one to show because a lot of times people talk about versioning and you can make it a conscious thing. So you can choose your structure, go through a process, and then at commit time, mint the correct version number change, make that available and publish. Publishing can go out, or top quadrant can just sit there and be queried for, for entire versions whenever needed. So we can push out, or we can just respond as necessary. So I just wanted to show that what we have available to us is the ability to handle candidate terminology, proposals, expert modeling, and this workflow version control change history mechanism is available across all of the collections. So Connor and Gigi and the team, they get to govern their ontologies, they get to govern their taxonomies, and they can leverage controlled workflows to get the right people collaborating at the right time in the right places. Going back real quick, obviously this is a huge value moving forward because we've automated or at least made programmatically available Adobe's desire to control the process. So request, candidate things, normalize those, bring those in alignment, validate, get approval, and publish. So we've been able to automate that whole sequence, and we are able to handle complex scenarios and situations. While there is a product, it is still available for help. It's deprecated from the Learn platform, but we have one record. We don't need both. We have one record that is able to be so well decorated and described in context that, yes, we can feed that out as flat list. We have it maintained in the graph. It is highly available to auto tagging, and we can make sense of it for agents to consume, and they are able to make better suggestions and recommendations instead of saying, for example, something like Premiere Rush, you shouldn't be promoting and saying that that's the thing that you should learn next. That should only be getting suggested whenever you're in help mode. And where this content is able to come out and go to delivery, regardless of what it is, one way of answering that is to say everything that I've done in the demonstration today, every click, creating a collection, starting workflows, editing, curating, it's all programmatically available. So when I'm in this kind of environment, let me just go back up to the upper level. If I were to do something like create a saved search, where I do a search on Rush again, if I want this saved, I can click the save. I can name it something relevant. And this is just a very weak little example, but our filtering mechanism is very rich. You can do validation type searches, quality type searches, completeness type searches, and everything becomes available via the search library. And the search library is, why am I talking about searches whenever I'm supposed to be talking about delivery? Everything that I do is available to contribute in a delivery way. So if an integrator, like someone working on the Factor team, wants to consume the data that Gigi and Connor are working on, they have a lot of different APIs that they could take advantage of. For example, here's an example where that saved search that I created for myself in the UI is actually programmatically available and can be executed as a GraphQL query. And now, instead of learning Sparkle and semantics, an integrator can say, I know GraphQL, it's JSON, JSON in, JSON out. And Top Quadrant as a platform has a self-documented GraphQL wrapper automatically generated from the ontology work that can be used to allow us to interact with full GraphQL mutation capabilities in and out. And this is an example of an API that I know that Factor is using, because what Factor does is they're able to, I'm going to go back to the slideshow here. An example of delivery is automation. And in this case, the example is localization. So using GraphQL, Factor have Oxford set up to poll for changes since the last time, look for localization. If it's flagged that it's needed and it's critical, it can bubble it up to the top. If it's do it over time, it can do what it wants to with that and trickle things over to an LLM, get the localization accomplished, bring that back in through GraphQL, insert it into a workflow so that the human in the loop can do the review and ensure that everything was well done. So the ability to have an LLM create candidate content into a workflow is being done by Factor. And to me, that's a really good example of delivery. And it's like an internal Oxford delivery. But because Oxford now contains Top Quadrant as a platform, the perimeter of Oxford now has GraphQL, Sparkle, Save Searches, and RESTful Web Services available for everything.
All
Over to
right.
you, Bram, with that.
Yeah. Is that a good stopping point? Okay. Thanks, Jesse. So a couple of things before we get started with Q&A. We've got a couple of questions that we can get to. We are going to send out an email to all of the recipients, and that email is going to have a link to a recording. And also, if you are at an organization where you think some of this might be helpful to yourselves, please reach out to Factor or Top Quadrant. We can, without any obligation, we can just have a conversation about what's going on in your organization and see if, some kind of a custom solution for you might make sense. So I'm going to start the the Q&A with a question from Shelley Carr from Autodesk. Hi, Shelley. In terms of governance and workflow, how do you educate the PMs or stakeholders to understand when it's appropriate to request new additions to the ontology? I think Rachel or Connor, this might be a good question for either of you.
Well, Rachel, I know I definitely have thoughts, but I bet you do too, and I've already talked a lot.
Well, I think part of the education really is around um, explaining the difference between a valuable searchable term versus a synonym, and understanding that it doesn't mean that the term that they chose was wrong, that we kind of in a way have to help them understand that the same thing can be searched or described in content 10 different ways. So how can we capture that? Anything you want to add to that, Connor?
Yeah, I will say also, so our resource portal, I think, is a really excellent piece of documentation that we can always just send to people to be like, hey, here is like what TAS is and what we do, and kind of use that as a framing and educational device when we're explaining like how and why to make requests. And I will also say for me and Gigi, we would much rather someone submit a request that we then work through and like modify on our end than have people like be too scared to approach us or to use the taxonomy. So that's kind of part of like the reason why we were so excited to participate in that taxonomy group I was talking about and do that lunch and learn, because I'm a really big believer that by putting ourselves out there and, putting our faces to our names and job titles, people think like, oh, okay, well, I'm a little shy about doing this, but maybe I'll reach out to Connor, to Gigi, or to Rachel and talk through my idea with them and see what they think.
Cool. I got another question from an anonymous attendee. Is the alignment between tool features and graph resources maintained manually, or do you use automation to keep them in sync?
So I think I might want a little bit more clarity on this question because when I read tool features, I think of our taxonomy tool features vocabulary list, um, which if that's what it means, then yeah. So there is some amount of manual effort for me and Gigi to make sure the tool features are like updated in the graph, like the actual terms and the relationships. When the actual product features are updated, we rely on our content authors and product teams to keep us in the know. We also attend like other meetings and keep our eyes on certain emails so that we try to get signals from a couple different places as to when we need to make a change. But I don't think it's particularly more automated than any of the other taxonomies we manage. Gigi, feel free to correct me in chat.
Yeah. Okay. Got a question here from Lana Burke, who we know from the Seattle taxonomy community. What has been the biggest surprise or friction point for the Oxford or Factor team in moving from Airtable to Top Quadrant? Rachel, I want to give you a chance to talk about that from the Oxford perspective, and then I think so we get to all the questions. We'll follow up in chat. With the answer from the Factor team.
Yeah, definitely. I don't think it was a point well, there was a remodeling. I would say that initially that wasn't necessarily expected, but as that remodeling happened, we understood why and understood why we needed to do that, to take it from this flat list into this kind of 3D, 4D, 5D aspect within Top Quadrant to really bring it to life. So it became more interesting, right? And then I would also say that the migration, which what was a big surprise for me from a product management standpoint, is the amazing work that Gigi and Connor did in terms of in working with the Top Quadrant team to do the actual data migration was fairly seamless. And it was quick, it was beautiful, and so that a lot of things can go wrong during migrations. So that was really a wonderful surprise to have.
Excellent. Thank you, Rachel. Finally, I have a question from Liz McLean. Uh, do you, and this might be a question for Jesse, see skills associated with tasks? New workforce transformation is shifting from titles to tasks.
I think anything's possible with the modeling. So the fact that the question's even being asked means that there's probably something that needs to be modeled there to support that. And with the right experts in place, I believe that can all be interconnected.
Okay, well, I think that's all the questions that we have. Just some final notes here. I think that this has been a lot of information. So if anybody wants to follow up, like I said, we're going to be sending out an email to all the registrants with the link to the recording and some of the highlights from the conversation. If you have any questions about that, please feel free to reach out. You can reply to the email. You can find Factor at factorfirm.com. You can find Top Quadrant at topquadrant.com. We've got, throughout the presentation, because we're also going to be sharing the slides, we've got emails for the participants. So from Factor and TQ's perspective, our door is always open and we'd love to hear from you. So we're a little bit over time, but the recording is going to capture all this for anybody who had to jump off. I still see we still have 25 participants. Thank you everybody for attending. This has been a really fascinating discussion, and we hope to be in touch with you in the future. Have a great day.